Random House Audio presents Edith Wharton by Hermione Lee, read for you by Kate Redding. A little American girl born into the middle of the Civil War is growing up in the 1860s and 1870s in a well-established New York family. She is a late child, with much older brothers, so her childhood feels like an only childhood. She is taken to Europe when she is very young, and has a bad illness while she is there, which makes her more anxious and fearful than she was before it. She enjoys her early exposure to Paris, Rome, and Spain, and when the family gets back to New York she finds it ugly and alien, and always feels like a stranger there. She is red-haired, awkward, shy, eager to please, in love with the sound of words, and passionate about dogs. She is happier when she is running about, swimming and boating at the family seaside home in Newport, or alone in her father's library, than when her mother dresses her up and takes her into society. She is devoted to her Irish nurse, affectionate with her father, less fond of her mother, and puts up with being teased by her brothers. She tells herself stories all the time. She is to have no formal education. Edith Wharton wrote 3 autobiographical versions of her childhood. 2 of them were published, A Backward Glance and its shorter sequel, A Little Girl's New York, and one, Life and I, was private, and much more uncensored. This was typical of her. When she was having a passionate secret affair in Paris in 1908, she kept 2 diaries covering the same period of time. One was a record of social engagements and the weather, with coded phrases in German referring to her meetings with her lover. The other, kept under lock and key, told the intense emotional story of the relationship, selectively, and shaping it like a novel. Wharton's life story often feels like a cover story, with tremendously articulate activity on the surface, and secrets and silences below. This is partly due to the missing bits in the archive, missing because she, or someone else, deliberately made away with them. There is no remaining correspondence with her parents or her brothers, and hardly any of their own documents. There are only a few letters from the most important person in her life, Walter Berry. She destroyed most of his letters to her, and managed also to retrieve and make away with hers to him. Only 4 of these slipped through the cull. There are very few of her many letters, some of them extremely personal, to Henry James. He burnt them. But there are plenty from him to her. There are only 3 painful letters from her to her husband, and few traces of him. There are no letters from her lover, Morton Fullerton, though hers to him came to light many years after her death. How she would have hated it! Her published autobiography is selective and evasive. Privacy is of great importance to her, and its violation is one of her subjects. Reserve and concealment are everywhere in her fiction. Her characters often live double lives, and keep the most important fact about their past a secret not just for a few months or years, like George Darrow in The Reef, or Justine Brent in The Fruit of the Tree, but forever. Newland Archer in The Age of Innocence buries his love for Ellen Olenska in the tomb of his role as good citizen, husband, and father. Kate Clephane in The Mother's Recompense will never be able to tell her daughter that she has married her mother's ex-lover. The real mother in The Old Maid, whose illegitimate daughter has been raised and taken over by her cousin, has to live with her secret and her jealousy. The woman in Atrophy has to go on concealing her love affair, even at the threshold of her lover's deathbed. The heroine of Wharton's posthumously discovered fragment, Beatrice Palmato, itself one of the most surprising secrets of her writing life, keeps her incestuous relationship with her father a deadly secret. Many of these cover-ups have to do with children. The story Wharton tells of childhood is usually one of alienation or secrecy. There are foundling children, like Charity in Summer, whose guardian ominously becomes her husband, or, in a comic version of the theme, Jane in The Mission of Jane, who sabotages her adoptive parents' lives so that they can't wait to get rid of her. There are children passed from parent to parent through a series of divorces, like poor lonely Paul Marvel in The Custom of the Country, or the young Wheaters in The Children. There are children given up by their mothers, as in The Mother's Recompense, or whose true parentage has always been concealed for the sake of appearances, as in The Old Maid, or the great story that sustains its secret of parentage until the last sentence, Roman Fever. Often the mothers are neglectful or unsympathetic, and the fathers are nowhere. The sensitive, talented child who is constrained by the mother's narrower standards of correctness repeats all through Wharton's work, and the inadequate education of American girls is a recurring subject, as here in The Fruit of the Tree. Isn't she one of the most harrowing victims of the plan of bringing up our girls in the double bondage of expediency and unreality, corrupting their bodies with luxury and their brains with sentiment, and leaving them to reconcile the two as best they can, or lose their souls in the attempt? The word unreality is insistent in Wharton. "She's lived too long among unrealities," says the true mother in The Old Maid, considering her daughter's false upbringing. A sense of unreality at some point comes over characters, like Lily Bart, who have been educated into social ambitions that go against their more natural desires. The subject of education, especially for girls, suffuses Wharton's work. Material advantage versus sentimental romance. Are there no other choices for women? What place does that leave for intellect, independence, natural passion, or professional ambitions? Wharton often uses a conflict between a mother and a daughter to argue that how we educate our children makes our society what it is. Typically, this subject is both of large-scale historical importance and also intensely personal. One of the childhood scenes in Logic describes the daughter's secret reading. Candida is in the library reading the Portuguese sonnets. She was 15, and Mrs. Browning was her poet. In her corner in the window seat, she overhears her mother telling a visitor that Candida is cold, so different from my other children, but she is perhaps the most intelligent. But Candida knows that when she reads Mrs. Browning, she was a volcano. The hidden daughter, reading for her life against her mother's ambitions and desires for her, is clearly a version of Edith Jones. Logic was never finished or published, but it was one of many fictions and memoirs in which Wharton made up versions of herself as a child and of the world she grew up in. The phrase "making up" is hers, and she uses it to describe the most essential activity of her childhood. She does this in her memoirs and in the draft of her unfinished novel, Literature, the story of a boy who becomes a writer. Making up began for her when Pussy, as she was called, was 4 or 5, and the family had just moved to Europe. She had begun inventing stories before then, from the moment she could remember, in fact, but now she found the necessary formula. The formula is described very precisely. It was ritualistic, solitary, and very physical. She had to have a book in her hands, preferably with lots of thick black type, and she would walk rapidly up and down in an ecstasy of invention, turning the pages as if reading, regardless of whether the book was upside down or not, and improvising out loud and very fast an imaginary story. Making up overlapped with learning to read. She would use the books partly to improvise with and partly to read from. In her published memoir, A Backward Glance, Wharton describes this activity as ecstatic and compulsive, and sets it comically against her mother's demands for her to socialize with other children. "Mother," she would say, urgently, "you must go and entertain that little girl for me. I've got to make up." Her mother disapproved. She thought this habit deplorable. Wharton describes her parents spying on their child's peculiar activity through half-closed doors, distressed and alarmed by her need for solitude in which to pursue her obsession, and trying to distract her with toys and playmates. Though she notes, too, that her mother made some attempt to take down the stories she was reading aloud, but could not keep up. The words were coming so fast. She links this ritualized solitary procedure with a later phase, after the family's return from Europe, when she was 10 or 11, when she would steal away to read for hours, lying on the rug in her father's library. The same words are used in the memoirs for this addiction to reading as for her earlier making up. secret.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?